Hello, how are you all? Good. I'm Courtney Tompkins. I'm a member of the Arts and Humanities Commission, and thank you for joining us tonight for the third Thursday poetry reading of To Sing Against the Night. Just one of many free Takoma Park events that we have. This weekend we have a performance of Chesapeake Songs and Stories, and then next week we have a world music concert, and I think some of you got this program out front. It lists all of our events, I think up and through November and into December. And then you can always learn more about kind of the full range of events that we have, including lectures, performances, exhibitions, all the fun stuff, on the Takoma Park Arts and Humanities website. I will turn it over to Kathleen to introduce tonight's speakers. Thank you.
Good evening. I think I've met most of you. I'm Kathleen O'Toole, and I'm the current Poet Laureate of Takoma Park. And I am delighted this evening to be able to introduce four incredibly accomplished poets and writers with whom I'm guessing most of you are familiar. I want to first say a note of thanks to these folks for proposing tonight's reading, To Sing Against the Night, which I'm going to let Ellen tell you a little bit about the impetus for this gathering of poets. But I would like to say thanks because it was one of the proposals that actually came in through our performance call that encouraged us to think a little bit differently about the third Thursday readings for this year. And so you will notice, particularly those of you who were here last month for the poetry reading on immigration and the American immigrant experience, that we're mixing it up a little bit. We're mixing up themed readings like last month and tonight with open readings of poets who were selected for this season's readings. So we hope you'll come back often, and I'll say a little bit more about what's coming at the end. I'm just going to say a word about each of the poets because you can read their full bios in the program. I think they're going to go in a little bit different order than what you have in the program. Ellen Aronofsky-Cole, who I actually thought was a Takoma Park resident because I've seen you around here so much, Ellen, who lives next door in Silver Spring, but is the author of Notes from the Dry Country and the chapbook Prognosis, and a very long list of journals in which her poems have appeared. I particularly like the article, My Life as a Fake Patient, that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Judith Harris, whom I just met tonight, who has taught at George Washington and American universities, and whose poems have been published nationally in a lot of everything from The Nation to the New Republic and the New York Times blog and the American Scholar. And I'm looking forward to hearing Judith's poetry tonight. Nancy Naomi Carlson, who I first came to know as a translator of the poet René Char several years ago, and who I've since met through Merrill, and poet, translator, essayist, and I think the one thing she would like me to mention about her new collection, An Infusion of Violets, which I have read, it's lovely. It was reviewed in the Washington Post yesterday, and I'm not going to read you the whole review, but she was compared to Persephone. Like Persephone, Carlson moves through various seasons, creating some stunning moments, and her work is referred to as elegant and understated. All of these poets will have books for sale tonight. And last but not least, Ethelbert Miller, who I knew as an important D.C. area and national poet when I first moved to Baltimore, I think in 1989. And I think you will know him as not only a poet, but a memoirist, a writer, and what I like particularly, a literary activist. And my personal favorite is that his most recent book, If God Invented Baseball, won the 2019 Literary Award for Poetry from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. So we're very honored to have these fine poets with us tonight, and I am not going to get back up here and introduce them individually. We're going to start with Ellen, and then she'll say something about the theme, and each of the poets will introduce their successor. I hope you will enjoy our reading tonight. Thank you.
Hello, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm going to start out with a little magic trick. Ta-da! I was inspired to start bringing a stool with me when I stand behind this podium because of my friend, Jill Raymond, who's here tonight, because Jill said, well, when you stand behind the podium, you just look like a head sitting on the podium with a hat on it. And I thought, I don't think that's the look that I want. So anyway, I want to thank you all for coming. We put together this reading to sing against the night because all of the poets that you're going to see tonight have had an experience of serious illness. And in fact, everyone will if you live long enough. And not only will you have an experience of serious illness, the people that you love will have experiences of serious illness. I had a very serious blood cancer 10 years ago. And I was told that I would have to have a bone marrow transplant in order to survive, which I did ultimately. But there was a period of about 10 months when I didn't know if there was going to be a donor available for me. And during those 10 months, when I was waiting, I had thoughts, the thoughts would never stop of what was going to happen. And I found that by writing, that I could tame those thoughts a little bit. And then I noticed that my poetry, and I'd been writing poetry for about 10 years before that, I noticed that my poetry seemed to be getting better, that it seemed to be moving up another level because the stakes were higher. And I really started thinking about the connection between things that are desperately important and the quality of the art that can come out of it. And I thought, well, these are poems. They're not just something I wrote to make me feel better. They're really better art. And I wanted to give other poets an opportunity to show the type of art that can come out of these heart-rending experiences. So we're all going to sing against night tonight. This is my book, Notes from the Dry Country, which was published about 5 months ago. And a lot of it is about the bone marrow transplant. The first poem that I'm going to read is the title poem. So you'll see where the dry country comes from. Excision 1, the cancer. I've named my breasts Titania and Peas Blossom, my sister said. Peas Blossom is never any trouble, but Titania is a real drama queen, hogging all the attention. She hasn't even noticed how she's become entangled in Bottom's arms, how he keeps sucking down grapes, belching, his spittle smeared across her chest. He doesn't know he's about to be excised. 2, who will not die. Aunt Norma said, if you dream of a child, someone will die. But in my dream, the baby was small and shy as quail. Unnamed, her heart beat like the sun. Grandpa's ghost toasted us with apricot schnapps, Grandma Celia fed us hot apples, bedded on fat yellow noodles. My cousin Tom snapped pictures like he did years ago at our wedding. Brian, his white wedding suit dusted with sugar, tipping cake into my mouth. Tom focusing on fingers, lips, everything extraneous cut out. 3, everything is a knife. The phone slashes my ears. Your voice drips out the earpiece. My tongue lies in my mouth, thick as a tumor. I would pull it out before I tell you this news, but words grow in my belly, quick as fungus, climb my bones. I cannot keep them still. I am like the maiden in a fairy tale. When I open my mouth, birds fly out. I try to call them back, but they have flown to a dry country where neither blood nor water flows. The bone marrow transplant was done at Johns Hopkins. In the lobby at Johns Hopkins, I see a baby with no face. Her eyes are lidless, her nose a hole, her mouth a lipless gash. Her father tenderly wipes her chin. Her hands, furled like flower buds, push through the sleeves of her pink fleece sweater. I can't forget her. I'm in the infusion chair. Tubes snake my arms. I dream of owl babies. They perch on IV poles, crowd onto cots, fill the halls. The doctors rush by. The owlets neither eat nor sleep. They have no feathers. They do not blink. Pigs. I wake laughing from a dream, a tree blooming with pigs. Remember when Laura dreamed of the pig tree when she was 6? How we laughed, I ask. And you try so hard to smile, you wince. The nurse hangs morphine on my IV. Chemotherapy has seared my throat, blistered the mucosa in my mouth. I decide no more pudding, no more broth. My doctor says 2 things. You have to eat. You have to stay strong. I do neither. I curl onto my side, wish to suck my thumb. Patients march past my door, walking their IV poles as if they were large pets. I push the button for more morphine. Pigs drift from the ceiling like pink balloons, settle against my chest. I'm going to skip forward to another part of my life, which was when my Uncle Howard passed away. Mourning Uncle Howard. When Uncle Howard died, his spirit drifted toward heaven. But Jews don't believe in heaven, so he disappeared into those high, feathery clouds clustered over Penobscot Bay. Mother said one year it got so cold the bay froze over. Do you miss Maine? I asked. We were sitting on the sun porch of her Dallas home and watched the thunderstorms roll in. No, she said. I'm done with cold. I never want to be that cold again. At 78, Aunt Norma painted the ships in Belfast Harbor. They yanked at their anchors like colts tethered in an icy field. Look, Ellen, Aunt Norma said. Look at the noses of the ships. The tide pulls and pulls until they all face the same way. In 56, Howard sold the junkyard and brought a farm a few miles up Route 1 in Searsport. The horses raised and lowered their muzzles like old men davening in the back of a shul. Who ever heard of a Jewish horse farmer? Said Uncle Joe. Do you miss riding? I asked Aunt Norma. Oh, yes, she said. I remember what fun it was galloping past the second field into the woods with Howard, galloping and laughing, a long time ago when we were 60. I took my girls to the second field to pick wild blueberries. The patch was so overgrown we could hardly find our way. The pump broke, and water from the old spring bubbled up until the whole bottom of the field was lost. One thing about my family and the blood cancer that I had is there was clearly some kind of familial thing going on because my sister died of leukemia in 1984, and she had a bone marrow transplant before she died, but she didn't survive it. And 84 was really like the dark ages of bone marrow transplants. And my father had a blood disease also, myelofibrosis, which is not the same thing as leukemia, but will develop into a very nasty leukemia eventually. But he passed away before that happened. So what I'm going to read you now is an alternate sonnet. I owe Sherman Alexie for this form, which is not really a sonnet at all, but it's 14 lines, and every line is numbered. So that's why I call it a sonnet. Alternate sonnet for my sisters. 1. Barbara's liver begins to fail. I asked my father, should I fly to California? 2. No, he says. I'll call you when it's time to come. 3. She dies that night. 4. I'm the oldest sister now. 5. Barbara donates, 5. Barbara has acute myeloid leukemia in 84. She's 36. 6. Sharon donates bone marrow to Barbara. It's a perfect match. 7. I have leukemia in 09. I'm 59. 8. We both have bone marrow transplants, but not at the same time. 9. The chance of survival is 50%. 10. Sharon's bone marrow does not match mine. 11. When Barbara dies, Sharon goes to bed for a month. 12. Countdown. 3 sisters, 2 transplants, 1 death. 13. In this line, there's nothing. 14. When I was a child, I thought when we get old, we'd all live together in Manhattan and keep cats. at Rosh Hashanah services. I felt space open between yesterday and today. I sat in the last pew, and I could not see Cantor Lydia's face. All I saw was a blur, as if she too stood outside time. When I was sick with cancer in '09, it seemed someone knocked a hole in now, and I might leak out. So close I could stick my arm through. I thought it might be a blessing to lose my face, release it like an injured bird into the Baltimore sky. Crows roosted in the tulip trees outside the hospital window, a blur of black wings. I'm going to read one more poem. And I have to say that since the bone marrow transplant, I've had a personality where anxiety features rather large throughout my whole life, but almost dying didn't do anything good for it. And I am pretty focused on illness. So when I get sick, I get extremely anxious. This poem is called "Good God, Girl, Stop with the Death Already." I'm staring at a big gold watch, swinging back and forth, murmuring, "Death, death." Every poem I write, boom, there it is, the skull creeping in, grinning underneath the words. I whisper, "Please, darling, don't die tonight," into Brian's healthy, sleeping ear. And when Nina in Chekhov's Seagull says she always wears black because she's in mourning for her life, I breathe, yes, and vow to heave all my black t-shirts, dresses, and pants out the window and dress all in red because the dead don't wear red. If there's a gun in Act 1, someone will be dead by Act 3. And there's always a gun. I tell my doctor I can't remember how I knew Nina was going to kill herself. Dr. Oser says, "Don't worry, people with Alzheimer's aren't unhappy. It's their loved ones who suffer." I promptly forget 3 more excruciatingly urgent things. The right side of my face starts twitching, and after a week I realize I not only have Alzheimer's, I also have ALS. I write 2 more sonnets about the Grim Reaper. At night, I cry quietly so I won't disturb my beloved. "What do you like better, cremation or burial?" I ask him in the morning. Dr. Oser studies my hands for fasciculations, tells me no ALS today. "How silly of me," I say, laughing too brightly. Cue to Clouds at Sunset, Requiem in D minor played by an orchestra of cellos, Prince Hamlet and his Flight of Angels, a dead mouse moldering in the pantry, a beech tree drops her diseased leaves. Thank you. Next up is Judith Harris.
Well, we'll try and keep things cheery. I'm going to start with a poem that was written for my mother, who suffered from Parkinson's and accompanying dementia. My mother always slept like an angel. My mother's mother taught her how to sleep, her palms pressed together and clasped under her ear, her lullaby head on the satin pillow, her chiffon gown tied at the nape like a barber's cape. Oh, my mother would sleep, her dreams tucked like those loose strands, her widow's peak and blonde cob. All night the trip of her breath like the wheeze of a seesaw, or the tip of the scales, upwards and downwards the heaves, the revolving doors of a department store. My mother dreams numbers, a statistician's paradise of landing in evens. She does not dream of her mother drowning in fur, her father's stump leg, or the plastic slipcovers in their Brooklyn apartment. Now my mother's dementia keeps her alert, making friends with her hallucinations, the old Kafkaesque machines and animals that hover on the walls. She can't find her way from the bed to the door. She can't navigate her way out of her nightgown. It takes 2 hours to get my mother dressed. She is slack as a rag doll with her sliced off breasts. But oh, in the dark breath of night, she is still an angel. She sleeps with her palms sealed like the good girl we send away to blessedness, hoping she won't get lost there or forget her ticket numbers at the butcher's, that she will remember the first and last things are always the same, that there is nothing to this substance of air but the beauty of being and not being there. And I'm going to read a recent poem that came out in American Life and Poetry this summer. And if I had any trepidations about coming out and saying that I had been hospitalized, this poem took care of that. In April, after 6 months in the hospital, in the bedroom, I noticed you've stacked my things into piles, clusters of everyday items, my grandmother's costume beads, spare reading glasses, prescription bottles that have long expired. It is getting dark. Through the window, the moon shades in its marble, and another woman appears in my mirror. This one too heavy, the other too old to be me. Now I run my fingers over a layer of dust on the tabletop, where in my absence you've gathered my poems, early drafts without beginnings or endings. The cherry blossoms bloom and the black-capped chickadees sate at the feeder, the garden still waiting for whatever might come. And I'm going to go back in time a bit to my first book and just read one poem. Another illness, insulin shock. What did I know then, watching Grandma shiver, beat-faced in the kitchen, over a sink of small glasses and knives, Grandpa rolling his sleeve up, making a fist as if he were going to box. Blood runs in trees like so many rivers. It is blue under the skin. I see how he winces at the sight of the needle, as she, dour as any doctor, jabs it into his arm. It is 1965. The sky is slow motion with clouds while I pivot in the threshold, holding my breath. Does it hurt like a bee sting, or the prick of a pin. I remember the story of William Tell and the aim of the arrow. It is the child in me who refuses to look. January at the nursing home. This morning, sunlight crunches the edges of the elderly branches. It is freezing in the yards. The squirrels scramble to leftover grass, and the wind picks off the zeros of leaves. Outside the window, I note the down filaments of a clawed and twisted oak, how a few dried twigs are stuck like arrows. In the deadlock of sky, there is little argument. The cold will come and go as it pleases. It will mash up its syllables and turn all of us inside out. It will freeze and splinter some indefatigable crow's wings and drip the ivy in caskets of ice, thawing at last into what matters. Jerry, this is called Scar, after a lumpectomy scar. I went through breast cancer. It looks like a fishbone or a railroad track, a pinkish horseshoe, or a sunset fading in the horizon. Over the years, it has diminished, stitch by stitch, where the scalpel went in and they drew out the tumor, blinking like a lighthouse. That thing could have killed you, the pathologist said, after studying it under the microscope and dropping it with his tongs into a specimen jar. Now it is only a brazed line, a canceled letter, a rancher's brand on a calf's flank. Reflected in the mirror, I can even crack it into a smile. But don't believe me. It won't wash off on its own. The body was made to protect it, like a soldier preserving a tomb. And this is my darkest but favorite poem of the illness poems. This came out in the New Republic. Regress. On the day I graduated from saltines to toast and could manage a few laps around the bedroom with the 2 transparent tubes and needles stuck in my arterial veins, my mother showed up at the door, demanding I take my wig off so she could see what I looked like now, that my hair had all fallen out, every eyelash curl, every inch, of peach fuzz gone, her face cocked in the way the Parkinson's had set it, like a wind-up toy missing a part, her pants too short and socks lewdly unmatched, her turquoise eyes sparkling as she gripped the banister, stirring herself, leaning on the avuncular cane. So I yanked the wig off and stood there with my rolling IV, as if this were some kind of accomplishment. And she did not flinch or shudder the way she did at the sight of blood, but instead kept staggering towards me as if she wanted to rock my bald head in her hands, as if it had now just occurred to her, you are my beautiful baby. And I just want to go to a few three very recent poems going back to the 6 months at Johns Hopkins. This was the first poem that I wrote in the hospital. At best guess, after a long illness, at best guess, it is not a spruce or a maple, perhaps a crepe myrtle, the landing here for a coterie of sparrows or wild finches chortling their devotionals. It is almost spring, and I've lost 3 seasons inside a memory that fades, the way light appears, then disappears into day, or the weight of the sun or moon is born from the sky without a sign of strain, the clouds giving over to ebullient rays, and the heart bears a happiness subtracted from sorrow. And just 2 more. To the crow near the hospital koi fish pond. There, on a candelabra of branches newly lit for spring, I see you shuddering your wings, feathers anointed, your thoughtless pleasure transformed into a 3-note, unmelodious song. Such caution becomes you, the sudden tilt of your saffron beak, a map of the sky spread out in front of you. After so many days and nights, when hope had almost abandoned, I sit by the pond where orange and gold koi fish skim the misty surface in search of a scrim of conspicuous food, the scales of their skin shimming in bright sun as storm clouds give way to refulgent rays and the swaying of fruit-studded trees. In a world become mute except for your cawing, I think there is nothing more human than this, your voice answering mine. On a walk home after a hospital stay. An inconstant sky sketched with smoky clouds, a little rain striking the gardens, where a goldenrod discovers its roots in the soil, and 2 topaz butterflies alight on the same branch, their wings luminously painted as the panels of a fresco. I pause to see them there, each one suckling the center of a blossom, a cool breeze of autumn passing through us, and for a moment I think there is no other happiness like this. Okay. And Naomi Carlson is next.
Thank you, audience, for coming. You're very brave to come and hear about what we're reading about. And then it was so cold today. Did anybody wonder what to wear? Because all of a sudden we had to change what we were wearing. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Brendan and Charlotte and Kathleen for that lovely introduction, and Ellen for organizing us. When she first proposed the idea, I thought, oh, this is going to be a fun reading. And it's a little hard to decide what to read in a context like this. But I think we all bring medical calamities to the fore. And chemo, doesn't it seem like chemo is now almost a rite of passage, that you know someone who's going through it, or you yourself have gone through it, and maybe they're doing more chemo these days, or maybe we're just getting sicker, which may be more what the explanation is. So I'm going to start with my two cellular misfunctions. I thought I was a dark poet. I wrote about a baby who was born and lived the day and died, and that drove me to writing poetry. And so I wrote lots of poems about that. And then I went through the cancer experience. As we counselors, in my other life, I'm a counselor, and we reframe things so that we can digest it a little bit more. And we don't upset ourselves as much if we use the right language, though, of course, we're like in knots inside. So this one I'm going to start off with is, you know how they say when you're nervous in front of a group that you should picture the audience naked? So this one, actually, I'm having you picture me naked because it's a nude painting, so I really don't want you to picture that, but you still need to. There is a painting that my ex-husband did that is on the wall of the bedroom, and it's called Odalisque. Nude like a Matisse, lounged under the hard eyes of years, semi-reclined in a slat-backed wood, both draped in green passing for silk, her then-husband artist could ill afford. In the upper left, a 70s Brooklyn view, with slow to gentrify homes robed themselves in muted citrus, a patch of sky modeled baby blue, a sign her second child would die the day he was born. Her eyes looked down, allowing us to sip at leisure her curves, the creamy expanse on her left, relieved by the areola's blush, nipple not yet nursed by a child, nor pierced by a sentinel node probe, or what cannot be foretold, cells gone deeply wild in the ducts of her breast, their telltale sonic tracks only exposed to the trained naked eye. Scalpel's thrusts goading the too close heart, then once again doubling the old suture line, leaving a scar nearly unseen, but for that extra pucker of skin, as if taking in a blouse. And taking us in, she lets us know she knows she will always look the same. And an infusion of violets took 20 years in the making because I don't think there was anything to hold it together. And so as bad things kept happening, those things were able to hold it together. The idea of infusion, there's so much that we infuse in our bodies that come through us and leave us. There's just the infusion of tea that you make, and then there's just love comes in and out and leaves us, and of course chemo that comes in. So this one is radiation, a change of pace. And with radiation, it was, for me, 19 days straight, except for a weekend or two here or there. And it ended the radiation on December 24th. So that was, it'll be 5 years this year. And then it was left side radiation too, and that's scary because the heart is there, so you're always conscious about that. So this is called Day 19. X-rays run me through, angled past my baldness, my breath with a skim of light across my skin. And feeling nothing and seeing less, I invent the plight of ions, phantom particles blasting black holes in my culpable left breast. The machine clucks and whirs, blends with white dreaming Christmas piped into this wintry scene. A sigh could shred my heart. More rads zipping by than a summer of black monzonite sand, dividing all of Brazil into fractions of grays for 19 days in a row. Each layer of skin reddens and weeps. Bare-breasted, tattooed and scarred, I ride electromagnetic waves that see through me. Calendula can't save my body from rubbing against itself. And then in some ways, writing chemo poems was fun because you didn't have to worry about the title. There were 4 rounds, so there was infusion, round 1, infusion, round 2. This is a villanelle, infusion, round 3. A coded language emerged from a morpheme sea. Hyperplasia, eczema stain, nuclear grade. Charmed times are not evoked in 3s. 3 weeks between infusions, reprised in frayed dreams of the needle's wake. A broken language emerges. A lymph sea reels with vertigo. Red blood cells retreat. I am bald and moon-faced. Where's the harm in 3s? Cytoxin whispers, corroding nails as it seethes drip by drip in recalcitrant veins. A muted language merges with closed seas of blood so pale, a slight shift of disease could set off a swell so untamed that evoking 3 times 3 times 3 charms may not be enough to save me. My body knows how it will end, but remains, with or without charmed times evoked in 3s, a veiled language merging with closed seas. So, when you're writing about serious things and illness, there's something transformative. I think Ellen was talking about that, about the power of art and changing what you have gone through and making it something different, and in some ways making you healthier in some ways. It took 20 years for me to get on paper poems about the baby who died. And then when I had cancer, it took 2 years to get something on paper about the cancer because I couldn't move past it. And then I remembered how I had used writing as a way to cope with the baby's loss. And recently, in the last month, my little schnoodle, 14 and a half years old, we lost her. And it's been really difficult. And I thought, well, I don't really have 20 years to sit around and wait before I start writing about the schnoodle. And I don't want to wait a few years either. I really know that writing helps me. And so I also do essays, and I've been working on an essay for the last month. And that's really been helpful to me. So in honor of the transformative power of poetry, this one was the one, interestingly enough, that in the Washington Post review, she quoted parts of this poem. And I thought, isn't that interesting? People notice different poems in the book, and it's maybe not my favorite one, or it's an oldie but goodie one, or something resonated with them. So I am going to read that in honor of Elizabeth Lunt and her choosing that. And it took place, the impetus was at the Renwick Gallery. They have all that glass. So it's called Glass, Glorious Glass. And it's a sonnet. At the Renwick Gallery. Let me be your molten glass, any shape you desire, free-blown chalice, champagne flute, whose rim rings perfect A's, embellished coupe. Emerald and gold leaf Venetian, I'll stain your lips with inventing fountains of Thor, or glaze them red with ruby and rosette. Fill me with your fire and make me conform to your breath, writhing in the heat but not consumed. Make me blossom birds of paradise, or weave me wings of indigo or white. I'll be bunting or angel drawn from the heart of flame, rare as ancient fragments of glass recovered near Persia. Hold me to the light and see through me, sheer as a veiled night. So let's see. I want to save time for Ethelbert. I am co-editing a Jewish anthology of contemporary Jewish poems for the third millennium. Whew. And it's been fun. 101 poets, Ed Hirsch, Jane Hirschfield, David Lehman, emerging voices, everyone on the continuum. Merrill is a part of Merrill Leffler, who also read the first poem I ever wrote. He's a part of this anthology. So I thought, I write Jewish poems, but not a lot of them. So after reading 800 submissions of Jewish poems, I found myself writing some Jewish poems. So I'm going to read two. My Goyische ex-husband. For 18 years, he was one of the chosen to help knead the challah dough, yeast and sugar dissolved in a tepid bath, oil mixed with eggs, flour sifted on top. Flour dusted his hands like pollen, like ash, what we might have buried if given the chance, before our baby, born blue but alive, was whisked away, and we, not knowing to question Jewish law, halakha, our son deemed stillborn for not having lived out a month. A mishap of DNA was to blame, though what were the odds that our bloods, mine Ashkenazic and his from a Swedish coast, would carry the same mutant gene? We could not keep grief from our home or from sticking to skin. Unlike the dough, whose lumps we tried to best, a pinch of flour one at a time, so it could rise, become more than itself, to be rolled into ropes of 3 or 6, then braided like hair of the Sabbath queen, and left to rise again on a parchment tray before baked to a perfect gold. And the last one is a new one. Always scary to read a new one. Bookends. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Bookends for the 10 days I joined the aisle side of believers, making amends for the past year's sins. Each one counted, fist to chest, though flawed as I am with having been stiff-necked, succumbing to grudges, weakness of will, I know I will never be able to recall. Should I live as long as Sarah, all my transgressions now buried somewhere in my body, dormant as cancer cells that hopped a ride on a vessel of blood, maybe years ago, even before you felt the main tumor growing, like greed, close to the heart. Day 5 sundown, the precise midpoint for these days of atonement, days of awe, knowing nothing lasts long in the middle, a space that can't be contained as it morphs from what it was to what it will be. The too cold porridge, once too hot, may soon end up spoon down the drain. Mid-phase, mid-phrase, in media res, dazzle with their chimeric truths. A midsummer's eve gradually concedes to the shortest day of the year, the growing chill. There and here, bookends say for a season of blessings, but sometimes hard to know if you're halfway between the beginning and end until you're there, just as no one living right after the fall of Rome could define that time as the Middle Ages. Dark, perhaps, but you need to know light to know dark. Before the first night star appears and the gates close as the Nila service ends, when the staccato teruah of the ram's horn sounds, after the moan of the tukiyah, I pray for loved ones hovering around and pray to be sealed in the book of life, the tukiyah gedolah held as long as a breath. Thank you so much. And now, our anchor person, Ethelbert Miller.
Thank you for the invitation. Um, this is very nice. Just make sure you get one of these. Very nice. And it brings me to this poem that I have in here. And I'll dedicate it to Elijah Cummings. Because this poem is about black men who are dying, who are younger than I am. And I remember Elijah Cummings when he was running for student government at Howard University. Black men are precious. Black men, black friends having strokes, black men younger than me, good men with bad hearts, men who did not follow their fathers into factories or the post office, black men who went off to college and pulled themselves up by degrees, men who did not sink into despair but lifted their families into new homes, black men who survived the bullets, streets, and police, black men who saw the horizon and the stars. They marched as if Garvey held out his hand, not to Ethiopia, but to our hearts. Black hearts, now failing for unknown reasons. Why? Why do we die so young? Why are we not like our grandfathers sitting on the porch, rocking away the years? Why are we not the black men returning from the wars and lifting our girlfriends up into wives again? Why do we date this early death? After all the exercise and pills, after the changing diet, why is there such a cruel hunger that appears and takes our years? Black men, my friends resting in their open coffins, waiting for someone to sing Precious Lord and take their hand. Black hands closing with so much love still left to give. It's for Elijah Cummings. This is a short poem titled Depression. When I started out writing poetry back around 1969, I would have finished my poetry reading by now. My poems were very short. And one of the things that I think got me into writing longer poems was poetry readings. Depression. We drown every day. The water too often invisible and seldom wet. One of the things about illness that changes our lives is when we become caretakers. Sometimes people ask me, and maybe many of the writers who are here even ask that question, what's your favorite poem? You know, something like that. One of the poems that's meaningful to me, because it's public, is a poem that's at DuPont Circle. You know, when you come out of the metro on the red line, there's Walt Whitman's poem. And then when you get older and you take the elevator, the elevator by the side there of the escalator, there's a bench. And my poem is around that bench. And that is a poem for caretakers, people who took care of loved ones who died of AIDS. And I could not have written that poem if I had not been influenced by my friendship with Chase and Gaver and also Essex Hemphill, but especially Chase and Gaver, because Chase and Gaver was the first person I knew who was dying of the AIDS epidemic. At that time, what happened is that Chasen, who I didn't know that well, he was the one that turned over the copyright of his work to me. And he is the person who is responsible for taking a proposal that was just an idea and building on it, and that is the literary archives that's at the Gelman Library at GW. And so I'm deeply grateful for that. And what they did is they found the proposal that I wrote and Chasen's comments on how to make a better archives. So he's a person. And that leads me into this poem about my sister, because I took care of my sister who died 2 years ago, had to relocate her from Yonkers down here, and then take her body back to New York because there was no way my sister was going to be buried in Virginia or Maryland or D.C. It just wasn't going to work. And this is called Passover for Marie. And my sister suffered from dementia, memory loss. You open the door and find your sister sitting on her bed. The darkness of the room resting on her shoulders, darker than the past. When you call her name, there is no ear of memory for her to hear, only a blank blackness of a blackboard, a whiteness of chalk erased words, gone, vanished, as if they had never appeared. This is how the mind collapses, how it falls down and stabs itself in the back. This is how the brain stumbles, turns a corner, and falls against the emptiness of wind. The scream, holler, shout of love cannot repair what is lost. God, you mumble to yourself. What kind of God would create such cruelty? My sister, my blood, sitting on a bed of nowhere. What becomes of family after a flood of what we remember breaks the levees of who we are? How do I embrace my sister's exodus? Where are we going without each other? I don't know if this is an illness, but it does strike me as being one. This is called Hell's Kitchen. When I was young, I overheard someone say, if it rains when the sun is out, it means the devil is beating his wife. I didn't know the devil was married. Who would marry a devil? It's sad to know too many do. It rains too often these days. Women trapped in homes being punched and slapped, some raped into submission. Hell should be a woman's wrath. Every devil should be homeless. And I'll use that. My friend is the poet laureate of the United States, Joy Harjo, first Native American poet laureate. If you want to talk about health issues in America, you begin with the indigenous people. When you look at the reservations, Indian territories, and you think about diabetes, you think of suicide, you think of depression, think of all these things. I picked up, when Joy had a reading here at the Library of Congress a few weeks ago, I picked up Joe Harjo's memoir, Crazy Brave, as well as one of her books of poetry I didn't have. And I read this book, and I said, man, it's a long journey to be poet laureate of the United States. You know, you read this, it sort of says, hey, I see her in a different light. And I think this is what happens when you sometimes deal with illness and sickness. You're forced to see people differently, okay? And then you see yourself. And I was stepping outside of myself, and I've been writing a number of poems that just deal with Native American culture, and this is called Breakdown. And it's risky because you don't want to culture, just cultivate someone's culture. You want to be respectful. But at the same time, you want to be a witness to what you see. And this is called Breakdown. Another breakdown on the reservation. My mind broken like a treaty. Too much alcohol fighting in my blood. When buffaloes commit suicide, they jump over fences. When the railroad comes, I'll ride my horse across the tracks. The only thing a person owns is death. The land belongs to everyone and no one. And I'll just read a few more poems. I woke up in the early 80s in Seattle, and a poem came to me, and it was in the voice of Rebecca, and it was about a woman battling breast cancer. And at that time, I didn't know anyone who was battling breast cancer. But after I wrote this poem, and I would go into high schools, and also college, and this is what poetry do, and this is what poets have to do. We open doors. And what I would sometimes do before reading this poem, I would ask, like a class, how many of you have a loved one battling breast cancer? Okay? And you see the hands go up, like a mother or sister, and it was very interesting to see that. Then I remember Senator Brooke, who had breast cancer. And that was very important because you realize that it's not just a women's disease, but it affects a certain percentage of men. This is called Rebecca. Will I hate mirrors? Will I hate reflections? Will I hate to dress? Will I hate to undress? Jim, my husband tells me it won't matter if I have one or two or one, it doesn't matter, he says. But it does. I know it does. This is my body. This is not South Africa or Nicaragua. This is my body losing a war against cancer. And there are no demonstrators outside the hospital to scream stop. There's only Jim sitting in the lobby, wondering what to say the next time we love, and his hands move towards my one surviving breast. How do we convince ourselves it doesn't matter? How do I embrace my own nakedness now that it is no longer complete? And this is one of the first poems that took me outside of my voice. When I look at my writing, my career, my work begins sort of in the Black arts movement in the late 1960s, but I mature as a writer during the period what I call the feminization of African American literature in the 1970s. And people who know my life story know that one of the closest persons to me was the poet June Jordan. And if you read some of June's essays about breast cancer, it's very human because she has an essay which says, like, what is this breast? What is this? And then she begins to do what poets do. We just don't speak from the heart. We do research. And she begins to research, and then she becomes, because she's a political writer, she becomes very angry at the statistics. And then what happens for me, I began to write other poems following what would happen to Rebecca. So here's a second Rebecca poem. Rebecca lets down her hair. I am a victim of my own war as I stand in the shower watching my hair fall and swim. Is this worse than cancer, this loss of hair? Why do I think of balding men in war camps and Japanese women after the bomb? I love my hair as much as life, to brush, to comb, to hold, my hair no longer in my eyes. And that's just a thing in terms of when you deal with breasts, and then you deal with hair, and what it means in terms of the female images. And all of a sudden now, you're losing both. Okay, you have to redefine yourself. And then it gets to this third poem, which I read. And poetry is always interpreted differently. So I wrote this poem in terms of saying, okay, what happens to Rebecca? And I'll read this, and I'll show you how poetry takes on different meanings to different people. Rebecca hides her scar. The affair was about finding the rest of me. There were moments when I wanted to be the other woman I dressed up to be. When I was a girl, I loved to walk into my mother's room, open the drawers to her dresser, search for her secrets. The affair was something I could place beneath the scar on my chest. I needed fingerprints on my flesh. I needed someone other than Jim. Is this a crime? I wanted desire and not death. This cancer is deeper than guilt. Maybe it's me that's growing out of control. Maybe it's this unspeakable love which kills. When my lover touches me, it feels like the first time. My body is new again. Nothing is broken. Nothing needs repair. God, I have no prayers and only one breast. I call my lover's name and he answers. I wanted to deal with this woman, Rebecca, where all of a sudden she has some fear because she has to reaffirm her beauty and that people are attracted to her. And I read this poem on a program with the Black lesbian critic Barbara Smith, and when I finished, she said, "Well, is it a woman?" And what happened? I'm glad you raised that because what happened? You assume that Rebecca's going to have this affair with a man because Jim, her husband. But then it might make more sense for her to have an affair with a woman to reaffirm, her body, seeing her body, and I just thought that was something where I learned from my own work. Just a few more poems, and to show you also how poetry can be a very healing force. I had a friend of mine, Beverly, who lives here in Maryland, and she was moving towards turning 50, but she didn't know if she would make it. And so what happens is, I wrote 50 love poems for a friend. I wrote 50 love poems. I was writing them like 1, 2 every day, and I was just writing them and sending them to them. They were all short. I was just sending them, sort of like, pushing somebody to the finishing, I was pushing her. And after I'd written all these 50 poems, Beverly had shared them with her mother, and the mother said, "You have given my daughter an unbelievable gift," you know. And as a poet, I realized not only is this what I do, but this has meaning and importance. This is not just me writing and hoping it's published or read, but this is like healing somebody, you know? And Beverly made it past 50, and I like to say because of my poetry, you know, which when we talk about the costs of healthcare, maybe writing our poems might be cheaper. I'll just read you 3 poems, and then I'll end. Number 57. And I wrote them backwards, you know? So I wrote them like 50, I wrote them backwards. Number 57. The warm weather makes me think of you near water. There are waves of love yet to touch us. All the sand falls slowly through our hands, as if our eyes were clocks waiting to undress. 67. You place yellow flowers on the table. I stand looking at your neck, back, and every petal that is you. Why are desires cut like stems? Number 78. The heart is a small room. Too often we fail to open the window and let love in. Number 85. These are the saddest lines I will write this summer. The ocean a witness to friendship and tides. My heart a seashell as empty as every night you are away. Number 87. You occupy everything. There's nowhere I can go without you. Now, I'll end with my last poem. And you ask after all this, what can make you well? What baseball can make you well? As you can see, our city is well. Our city is dancing because of the ball, beginning with the Mystics and then continuing with the Nats. And I'll end with this poem, which is about aging, and it's about Old Timers Day. And it might be very fitting if the Nats play the Yankees as opposed to Houston. And I say that for a very important cultural reason. When you look at this Nats team and you look at baseball in general, there are more, so many players from the Caribbean and from South America. And that's a very fascinating international aspect of the game. I always respond when people say, "Oh, there's no black people playing baseball," you know. Yeah, who are speaking English maybe, but there's black people playing baseball. And I just realized, for so many people, especially from the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, you want to play in Yankee Stadium. You know, you want to play in Yankee Stadium. You know, you don't want to play in Houston. All due respect to the Astros, but you want to play in Yankee Stadium. You know, and when you see some of these players, I look at Soto with his father. You know, for somebody, and this is where immigration becomes such a beautiful thing. When you see what this country means in terms of the hope. Not only did I make it to this country, but look at what my son is doing, you know? And there's that pride. And these are guys who maybe, you know, played catch with their father, you know, or their mother, and they make it, not just to the World Series, but the World Series in Yankee Stadium, you know? That's like going to see the Pope at the Vatican, you know? Old Timers Day. The workers arrived today, bringing tools to change my home place. My place one day will no longer be safe. This is what aging does to the body when things fail and the walls of youth become Berlin after the Cold War. Old age is coldness, bones reduced to everything that is fragile. How we break is how we suffer, it's how we die, it's how we dream backwards. The workers install railings and handlebars to prevent my falling, as if falling in love was still possible. I loved the Yankees when I was young, when I thought I could be a pitcher. Yes, I wanted my name to be called on Old Timers Day after all my mistakes and errors. Call my name, God, after Jim Coates, Art Ditmar, Ryan Duran, Whitey Ford, Don Larson, Duke Moss, Bobby Shantz, Ralph Terry, Bob Turley, Louis Royal, and tall Steve Hamilton. Call my name, God, when I walk slowly from the dugout to wave at the crowd, tip my hat, and call it a day. Thank you.
First of all, let me thank all of you for coming tonight. And then please help me to thank these wonderful poets for reminding us of the power of poetry to sing against the night, the illness, but also to transform and enlighten and heal. So let's give them another round of applause. I do know the universality of these themes. I don't see one of my predecessors, Anne Becker, here, but I do see people who've written the body with her, who have written out of various illnesses, and we know that that's very much a deep concern in our community as well. I want to mention just a couple of things. We will be, my colleague from the Takoma Park Arts Commission called your attention to all of the events that are highlighted, but I want to highlight the next Third Thursday poetry reading on the 21st of November. It will be one of our open readings, and it will include Judith Bowles, Jonah Colson, Kristen Farragut, and Nabila Washington. I believe that they're all brand new and have not read here before. So I'm going to ask you to help me by coming back and inviting your friends to be here next month. And I will also just put in a little plug. I'm going to leave little invitations out on the table for any of you who are here in Takoma Park on the Monday of that week, the 18th. I have a new book of poetry out, and we'll be having a book launch party here at Busboys, and any of you would be welcome to come. So thank you for loving poetry, and thank you for coming tonight. We'll be having refreshments. All of the poets, I believe, have books on sale, so please take a look, buy a book, and have some refreshments with our fine poets. Thank you very much.